Approximately 7 a.m. on 6 August 1945, Japanese Air Force officers were busy with their routine work of the day when suddenly their radars intercept a U.S. aircraft in the skies of Hiroshima. At the same time, all of a threat in Hiroshima reverberates. This U.S. aircraft came here for reconnaissance. Shortly after that aircraft sends a coded message to the U.S. bombers flying behind them. All is well, and then turns back and walks away. As soon as he leaves, the Japanese authorities relax and soon the sirens of danger go off. In those days, such sirens were common because it was the time of the Second World War and Japan was fighting on the side of the Axis powers. So many people also take it lightly and stick to their daily routine. But who knew that this is the peace before the storm? Shortly after, several U.S. bomber aircraft are suddenly spotted in the skies of Hiroshima. One of them was a B-29 bomber aircraft named Enola Gay, which drops a bomb over the city of Hiroshima at about 8:15 a.m. It was not any ordinary bomb, but the world's first nuclear bomb, which, after being in the air for about 45 seconds, it bursts. The explosion was so powerful that it shot about 12 kilometers in the sky. High, a mushroom cloud forms and the ground temperature reaches about 4,000 degrees Celsius. In the blink of an eye, 80,000 people are involved in the fire of death. Thousands of people simply stay on the walls and bodies evaporate. Those who survived the world's most dangerous explosion became living corpses. After killing thousands of innocent people, no one probably thinks of doing it again. But the U.S. 3 days later on August 9th, a second atomic bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, killing 400 people. But the question was, why did America do that? Did Japan commit so great a crime that 2 of its cities were turned into nuclear furnaces? Or did the U.S. have some other intentions behind it? I know the secret behind the verdict and the story that changed the world forever. On September 1, 1939, when the Nazi army invaded Poland on the orders of German dictator Adolf Hitler, at the same time, the world was included in the mouth of World War. World K's most powerful country split into 2 factions and became part of a fierce war. During this time, it was 2 factions, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. Where the Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Allied powers were mainly Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. By that time, America was distancing itself from World War II, but he was indirectly supporting the Allied powers by giving them weapons and supplies through the Land-Lease Act. At the beginning of the war, Hitler's terror spread throughout Europe. Countries like France, Poland, Austria, Germany went into possession. In Asia, on the other hand, Japan was also engaged in its imperial expansion by the Axis powers. At that time, Hirohige was the Emperor of Japan, who dreamed of a prosperity sphere for Greater East Asia, under which guise he wanted Japan to occupy as much of Asia as possible. Under this expansion, Japan had occupied much of China, including countries such as Cambodia, Vietnam, and Korea. But at that time, a big problem facing Japan was natural resources. Natural resources under Japan were equal to 10K. Japan imported more than 80% of its oil supply directly from the United States. But now America was not coming to the growing empire of Japan. The U.S. has repeatedly threatened to stop its aggressive military expansion. But even after that, when Japan did not stop, the U.S. stopped trade with Japan and froze all American assets in Japan. In addition, the United States, together with its allies, it imposed an oil embargo on Japan and stopped exporting oil to Japan. Japan's economy suffers as oil supply stops. Because of this, Japan decided that it would annex oil-rich areas of Southeast Asia, such as the Malay Peninsula, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Not only would this expand him, but he could also get oil himself by taking over the yen. But in order to occupy these areas, Japan first had to exhaust the strength of the U.S. Navy present in the Pacific Ocean. Because America had such a powerful navy nearby that could ever interrupt Japan's shipping routes in her expansion. And then on the morning of December 7, 1941, Japan launched an attack that changed the course of history forever. Early in the morning, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack was so swift and sudden that the United States did not have a chance to retaliate. More than 2,400 U.S. soldiers were killed in the attack. More than 20 American naval vessels were destroyed or damaged, which included 8 battleships, and more than 300 airplanes were completely destroyed. The attack shook the whole of America. President Franklin D. Roosevelt next in Gussie. On the same day, December 8, 1941, war was declared against Japan, and the United States officially entered World War II. Even after the U.S. declared war, Japan did not stop and continued its lightning-fast military operations against Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malawi, the Philippines, and captured the Indies. Thus, within a few months, Japan took control of much of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. It was his most brilliant and successful expansion. But this win will last longer. It wasn't. The United States used its full strength against Japan in response to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States and Japan fought many battles, such as the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway. Thousands were killed on both sides, but neither removed the back. After many more battles, the last major battle between the two countries was the Battle of Okinawa. It was such a fierce battle that more than 100,000 Japanese and about 12,000 American soldiers were killed. This battle made America realize that if she won from Japan, if the battle is fought face-to-face, how much will it cost? The Japanese soldiers were so dangerous and cowardly that they were willing to die, but they were not ready to give up. He would fight the battle until his last breath. Although the United States was weakening Japan by fighting such a war, it was also weakening its own strength. In every battle, his soldiers were killing more than his candidates. By 1945, half the world was tired of fighting wars. Italy had already bowed to the Axis powers. On April 30, 1945, when Hitler shot himself in a bunker, but a few days later, in May 1945, Germany also officially surrendered to the Allied powers. Only Japan was left in the Axis powers now, and she was ready to fight to her last breath. The only rule of his soldiers was death before surrender. Hirohito of Japan and his imperial army still believed that if the country was to be saved, the war must continue to the last soldier. By this time, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had died, and Harry Struve had become the new president. There, caught up in the war on the shoulders, came the responsibility of America. American resources were slowly being wasted in the war, but even after that, Japan was not ready to give up. Now Harry Truman had a decision to make: how America would get out of this war or take action to end it again. The idea of an invasion of Japan forced Truman and his advisors to think. And then Harry Drummond finds out about a secret project in the United States that 1,300 scientists, engineers, and soldiers had been working on for about 4 years without stopping. This super-secret project was called the Manhattan Project. It was one of the largest, most secret, and most expensive defense projects in the world. The project, which cost about $1 billion, was so top secret that even Harry Truman, when he was vice president, before he became president, didn't know exactly about it. The main aim of this project was to convert the energy of nuclear fizz into a dangerous bomb. Several of the greatest minds and scientists in the world, under the leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves on this project.
They were working together. By July 1945, he had built the bomb he was looking for. Then came the morning of July 16, 1945, when an event happened in Jornada de Morto Registan, New Mexico, that would change the world forever. The world's first nuclear test, known as the Trinity test, was conducted in this region of New Mexico. At 5:29 a.m., when he bombed, the sky sprayed a brighter light than the sun. Oppenheimer saw the scene and quoted a verse from the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in English. "Now I am becoming death, the destroyer of worlds." The explosion of the bomb was so terrible that even scientists wondered what he had made of it. Despite the success of this test, the United States had a weapon in the form of a nuclear bomb that could bring any country to its knees. But the question was whether to implement it or not. President Truman now had two paths: either a full-scale invasion of Japan or a shock that would make her surrender immediately. US military leadership believed that if Japan was attacked directly, millions of US troops would be killed. 12,000 American troops were killed in the Battle of Okinawa alone. Now if Japan attacks the main islands, the death toll increases many times over. In such, the United States now had a new destructive option in the form of a nuclear bomb. Harry Truman decides that instead of killing millions of his troops in ground combat and dragging the war out for several years, Japan will immediately surrender to SHORD using this ultimate weapon will be forced. Harry Truman, under the guise of the power of a nuclear bomb, the rest of the Allied leaders in July 1945 holds the Potsdam Conference with the leaders and warns Japan that if Japan does not surrender unconditionally, it will be destroyed. We'll have to face it. But Japan ignored the ultimatum. Japan had absolutely no idea how dangerous a weapon America now had and how much destruction it could cause. After the successful nuclear test, America's feet were in the sky. The US decides that it will let Japan swing, atomic bombs will be dropped on it. The United States took this decision not only to end the war by surrendering to Japan, but also to prove itself the world's superior. Where older and greater powers such as France and Britain were already talking to the United States, the Soviet Union also wanted the United States to realize its strength and suppress it. That is, one arrow is reaching several targets.
Were. The United States was looking at its own interests. He was sure that dropping the atomic bomb would make Japan surrender. None of his soldiers will be killed in the process. Whatever devastation will happen in Japan, and even for that devastation, Japan will be blamed because she was not ready to surrender. With this in mind, the United States immediately launched a top-secret operation to deploy its new nuclear weapons. From the port of San Francisco, California, the U.S. Navy sent a heavy cruiser named USS Indianapolis to the Trinity Islands in the western Pacific Ocean, available near the U.S. On this ship, uranium-235 cases were about half of the total stock loaded. The rest of the materials and tools are shipped to Tinian Island via transport planes. On 26 July 1945, the USS Indianapolis reached Tinian and unloaded the weapons and their accessories there. But on her way back from there, she was attacked by the Japanese submarine I-58 on 30 July and sunk by torpedo in the seas. Approximately 900 U.S. Marines yearning for hours in the open sea, and by the time rescues arrived, hundreds of them had died of shark attacks and dehydration. America is on fire after this incident and more Gaia. The Target Selection Committee, led by General Leslie R. Groves, to drop the nuclear bomb on Japan had shortlisted 4 cities: Kokura, Hiroshima, Nagata, and Kyoto. Kyoto, the cultural city of Japan, was at the top of the list, but Secretary of War Henry Stimson appealed to President Truman to remove it from the burden of culturalness because so many historical cities had gone around the world to destroy them. Kyoto's place had placed on the list at Nagasaki. Hiroshima was chosen as the primary target because it was also the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army and could clearly see the destructive power of its compact urban center bomb. The 59th Composite Group was assigned responsibility for dropping the atomic bombs. The mission was led by Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, who decided to bomb Hiroshima itself. He named his aircraft Enola Gay after his mother. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Enola Gay takes off from Tinian Island. In this mission, Enola Gay carried 2 B-29 aircraft. Observation and instrumentation was also for. According to Japan Standard Time, around 8 a.m., Enola Gay plane was flying over Hiroshima. At that time, this city in Japan was busy with its daily life. The city blew incense, the sky was open, the zoo was chattering, and the streets were noisy with footsteps. Some were distributing newspapers, some were going to work, and the children were going to school. For everyone, it was a normal day like every day. No one knew that everything was going to change in the next few moments. The world's first atomic bomb from a plane at exactly 8:15 is dropped on Hiroshima. Harney was that the code name for the world's most destructive and earliest atomic bomb was Little Boy. Little Boy remains in the air for about 45 seconds and bursts into the sky just above Shima Hospital at an altitude of 1,900 feet. The explosion caused by the explosion of this atomic bomb creates the most terrifying glow in history. In an instant, Hiroshima turned into a ball of fire. The force of the explosion was so intense that the wind speed reached about 1,000 kilometers per hour. A huge 12-kilometer in the sky, tall mushroom cloud formed.
And below, the whole city was turned into burning ashes. Temperatures at ground level reached more than 7,000 degrees Celsius. 2/3 of the city was destroyed. More than 80 people were killed in the blink of an eye, and the number of radiation deaths reached 1,400 in the coming days. Many people became the same steam. Many just stayed on the walls and rocks as if death had burned and carved their figures. Those who survived were dehydrated and skin hung from their arms. Many fled to rivers in search of water, but full of radiation, water took him and near death. In an instant in Hiroshima, all that had been built over the centuries was gone. Schools, hospitals, markets, and people were all destroyed. The city that a few moments ago was bustling, incense was burning. There was now only the mourning of death. Enola Gay tail gunner Sergeant Bob Caron, returning and seeing the blast, it looked to him like he was peeking in the direction of hell. Surprisingly, the bomb that burned almost the entire city in a few seconds for the same mission, Colonel Paul W. Tibbets distinguished them on his return to Tinian. The U.S. awards him the Service Cross. Not so much. The same day, President Truman addresses the American people and says, an American aircraft dropped a bomb on the important base of the Japanese Army, Hiroshima. It is an atomic bomb that is the most dangerous bomb ever and is 2,000 times more destructive than the British Grand Slam bomb. This is the same power that emanates from the sun, has been unleashed against those people who work to provoke war in the Far East. America was called to surrender after such a great destruction. Let them announce. But Japan's response shocked him. Even after such a large attack and so much destruction, Japan was not ready to surrender before the United States. Japan's military leadership was hopeful that it would mediate the Soviet Union and negotiate a peace agreement. But Kismet had something else. Just 2 days after the attack on Hiroshima, on August 8, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and launched an attack on Japanese forces in Manchuria. Japan was now surrounded on both sides. On one hand, America's nuclear fire, and on the other side was the Soviet Army. But the Japanese authorities were probably candidates for a better peace deal instead of unconditional surrender. Therefore, there was still no response from Japan to surrender. Seeing this attitude of Japan, the United States gets desperate to drop another atomic bomb on Japan. This time, the United States decides to drop a plutonium-based nuclear bomb on Japan, more dangerous than the first atomic bomb, whose codename was Fat Man. America was not so patient that he gave Japan a few more days to surrender. Only 3 days before he destroyed Hiroshima, then, on August 9th, he decided to drop the atomic bomb. 9 August 1945. At 11:02 a.m., the B-29 bomber boxcar pilot, Major Charles Sweeney, arrives over the city of Nagasaki, Japan. Earlier, the bomb was dropped on Kokura. However, due to clouds and smoke, the target of the aircraft was given to Nagasaki. However, Nagasaki was not a geographically ideal target for the United States. The flat terrain of Hiroshima and the visually distinctive city center maximized the destructive power of the bomb. But Nagasaki is divided into 2 coastal vales, between which was a range of hills. Right before 11 a.m., the B-29 bomber boxcar arrives in Nagasaki. But even here, the clouds covered the city. Fuel was so low that Charles Sweeney informed the crew,
"That's just a bombing pass, Mumkin." Suddenly, a gap appeared in the clouds which was quite north from the intended endpoint, but the crew left no chance and released the bomb instantly. Fat Man descended to an altitude of 1,650 feet and exploded at 11:02 in the northwestern region of the city over the Arakami Valley. The yield of this bomb blast is was equivalent to 21 kilogram tons of dirt, who found 70% of the city in soil. About 400 people were killed immediately, and radiation and burns pushed the number to over 7,000 in the coming weeks. Thus, the ashes of Hiroshima had not yet cooled that the second atomic fire of Nagasaki shook and destroyed Japan. The pressure on Japan was now at its peak, but the heroes finally realized that continuing this war meant erasing the whole country. Therefore, breaking with the centuries-old tradition of imperial non-intervention, he wanted to surrender, took the forest. On August 10th, the Japanese government issued a statement saying that Japan was ready to surrender, but that the Emperor Hiro interests should remain the symbol of the state and be removed from their positions. In Japanese culture, Emperor was considered a divine incarnation. Thus, if the United States arrested or executed the Emperor Hiro's, the whole of Japan could turn into a rebellion. Therefore, after much disagreement, Ally partially accepted these conditions of Japan. He decided that Emperor Hiro's interests would be kept as the symbolic head of state, but all political and military power will be in the hands of the Allied command. Some Japanese military leaders were not happy. He therefore attempted a coup against the surrender, but it failed. Then, on August 15, 1945, the Emperor Hiro addressed their country on the radio. This was the first chance when the Japanese people heard the voice of their emperor. Hirohito said in a calm but heavy voice, "We have decided to end the war. We will endure what is unbearable so that our coming generation can live." This word for Japan is
It was the end of an era. With this speech, Japan surrendered, and with it, the Second World War ended. Immediately after the war ended, Manhattan Project physicist Philip Morrison was sent to Hiroshima by the War Department to study the effects of the atomic bomb. Morrison called the bomb the weapon of saturation. According to them, it destroys so rapidly and so large an area completely that no candidate of defense survives. When Morrison saw the devastation with his own eyes in Hiroshima, he was shocked. The city became a pile of ash. It was Chuka. Morrison, shaken by this horror, spent the rest of his life campaigning against nuclear weapons. The repeated use of the U.S. atomic bomb became an issue of controversy around the world. Meanwhile, American novelist and journalist James Agee wrote in Time magazine that although the race has been won, the Times will remember that the destruction of this weapon of destruction is not limited to him. I trusted. To demonstrate this power is a deep stain on humanity. The vast majority of historians believe that although Japan had not surrendered before the nuclear attack, she had already lost. Her navy was destroyed, the air fleet had been destroyed, and the economy had collapsed. The U.S. Navy had already blocked the Japanese supply routes, causing severe shortages of fuel, food, and other resources. Most of Japan,
It was almost certain that Japan could no longer fight the war and that it was doomed to lose. It was only a matter of time before Japan surrendered. After the Soviet Union withdrew from the war, Japan's defeat was almost certain. But despite this, the United States dropped 2 consecutive atomic bombs on Japan in just 3 or 4 days, killing millions of innocent Japanese people. More than 95% of those killed were civilians who had nothing to take from the war. In this, the intentions of the United States began to be questioned. Was this bomb actually dropped to end the war? Then the United States used Japan as a nuclear testing ground to intimidate the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. In fact, the atomic bomb was originally developed as a defensive weapon, so that if Germany developed nuclear weapons first, the United States would be ready to respond. But by the time the bombs were ready, Germany had lost. Therefore, its possible defenses against Hiroshima and Nagasaki became an offensive experiment rather than a defensive one, where millions went just to prove what America can do. So far as the U.S. The second bomb, Fat Man, wasn't even properly tested. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who made this bomb, he later said that the U.S. had dropped a nuclear bomb on a damaged army and that it was a show of force, not self-defense. At the time, both the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the threshold of the beginning of a new Cold War. Japan, meanwhile, was already on its knees. But the United States wanted the Soviet Union to have a sense of its absolute power. Therefore, the use of the atomic bomb was a political strategy, not a necessity of war. Atomic force itself is a defensive weapon. The reason was that a great power like Britain, which ruled almost half the world for centuries, began to overtake the United States, and its place was taken by the United States. The use of the atomic bomb was also against international humanitarian law. According to the Geneva Conventions, deliberate attacks on civilians during war are illegal. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the entire city was targeted. It was not only a war crime, but also the greatest tragedy in the history of human civilization.
Some historians even believe that the racial behind this attack was also working. American propaganda during World War II portrayed the Japanese as all human. Seen from this perspective, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just military targets, but became signs of a racial retaliation. The role of President Harry S. Truman is also often called into question. Romaine had become president after the sudden death of Roosevelt and had neither sufficient experience nor full knowledge of the Manhattan Project. It is said that he did not understand the true devastation of the project. His advisors told him it would be a set-aside. He believed that the atomic bomb would make Japan surrender.